Stephen Colbert was no stranger to controversy. His late-night stage had become a battlefield of satire, where public figures were often targets of his sharp wit. That night, however, as the lights gleamed across the studio and the audience roared with laughter, Colbert set his sights on a man who had grown accustomed to being underestimated. Senator John Kennedy. The moment started with a simple joke. Colbert leaned into his microphone, twisted his mouth into a mock Southern drawl, and exaggerated Kennedy's Louisiana accent for laughs. The crowd erupted, clapping and giggling at the imitation. Too many? It was just another harmless late night jab, but to Kennedy, it was more than that. His accent was not just a way of speaking, it was a piece of his heritage, the voice of his people, and a reminder of the values instilled in him back home. Honesty, humility, and grit. Kennedy didn't rise to anger. He never did. Instead, he leaned forward in his chair, calm and steady, with the kind of composure that only comes from years of weathering criticism. His eyes twinkled as if he had been waiting for this moment. And then, with one sentence, he turned the tables. "Stephen," Kennedy said, his words deliberate, "I'd rather sound like the place I come from than forget where I came from." The studio went silent for a split second. Then, the silence shifted first into a ripple of applause, then into a standing ovation. Even those who had laughed at Colbert's mockery found themselves cheering for Kennedy's unshakable pride. The cameras caught Colbert's face drop ever so slightly, his smirk fading as he realized that Kennedy's one-liner had carried more power than all the jokes leading up to it. What Kennedy had done was more than defend himself, he reminded millions watching at home about the importance of identity. Too often, people were judged for their accents, their roots, or the places they hailed from. Kennedy's words spoke directly to every viewer who had ever felt ashamed of their background. He turned a moment of ridicule into a lesson in self-respect. But the story didn't end in that studio. By the next morning, the clip had gone viral. Shared across platforms, replayed on news outlets, dissected in podcasts. Kennedy's one-liner resonated far beyond political lines. Farmers in the Midwest, teachers in the South, immigrants who spoke English with heavy accents, all of them found something personal in his response. They weren't just celebrating a senator's quick wit. They were celebrating their own voices, their own identities, and their right to be respected for who they were. Stephen Colbert, for his part, acknowledged the moment on his next show. While he stood by his brand of comedy, he admitted, half joking, half sincere, that Kennedy's words had knocked the wind out of him. It was rare for someone to silence the late-night host, but Kennedy had done it without raising his voice, without insults, and without theatrics. Just truth behind the viral clip, though, was a deeper truth about Kennedy himself. His life had never been about blending into the elite or polishing away the parts of himself that felt too different. He had faced ridicule before for the way he spoke, for his slow drawl, for the way he seemed to pause and savor each word. But instead of changing, he wore those traits like a badge of honor. To him, an accent wasn't a weakness, it was proof of where he came from and who he stood for. Weeks later, at a town hall in his home state, Kennedy was asked about the viral moment. A young woman stood up, her voice trembling as she described how she had been bullied in college for her small-town accent. "People told me I sounded uneducated," she said. "But after hearing you, I don't feel ashamed anymore." Kennedy looked at her with the same steady calm he had shown Colbert, and he replied softly, "Don't ever let anyone tell you that the way you speak makes you less. What matters is not the polish of your words, but the truth inside them." The room filled with applause, but it wasn't the kind of applause you hear at a comedy show. It was heartfelt, heavy with the weight of shared struggle and triumph. By then, Kennedy's one-liner had become more than just a viral clip. It became a rallying cry for authenticity. It reminded people that the voices they carried, whether rough, accented, halting, or musical were part of their story. And no amount of mockery could erase that. In the end, the story wasn't about Colbert losing a battle of wit. It was about a larger lesson. Strength doesn't always roar, and dignity doesn't need a stage. Sometimes it only takes one line, spoken with conviction, to remind the world that true power lies not in changing who we are, but in embracing it. And that's why Kennedy's words would live on, far beyond that late-night stage. Because in a world quick to judge, his one-liner was a reminder to stand tall, speak proudly, and never forget where you came from.